Just 90 miles from the shores of Florida, a familiar name has returned to the center of global headlines. Cuba. For decades, the island nation has existed under the shadow of U.S. foreign policy, economic sanctions, and geopolitical rivalry. Now, once again, tensions are escalating, this time triggered by a dramatic shift in power dynamics in South America and a bold warning from President Donald Trump. In a statement posted on his social media platform, Truth Social, President Trump issued a direct message to Havana: no more oil, no more money, and a strong suggestion that Cuba should strike a deal with the United States before it's too late. The warning came at a moment when Cuba is already facing one of the most difficult economic periods in its modern history. Fuel shortages, rolling blackouts, food insecurity, and mass emigration have pushed the country to a breaking point. What exactly is happening behind the scenes? Why is Venezuelan oil so critical to Cuba's survival, and what does this new confrontation mean for the future of the island and the wider region? To answer these questions, we need to examine the political, economic, and human dimensions of this unfolding crisis. On January 11, President Donald Trump posted a message that quickly reverberated across diplomatic circles and international media: there will be no more oil or money going to Cuba. 0. I strongly suggest they make a deal before it is too late. The message was short, blunt, and unmistakably clear. Trump did not specify the terms of any proposed agreement, nor did he explain what Cuba would receive in return, but the tone suggested urgency and pressure. For Cuba, a country heavily dependent on imported fuel, the words landed like a warning siren. To understand Cuba's vulnerability, it is necessary to look south, to Venezuela. For years, Venezuela has served as Cuba's largest oil supplier, providing subsidized crude that kept power plants running, vehicles moving, and the economy afloat. Even as Venezuela itself fell into deep economic turmoil, it continued shipping oil to Cuba as part of a long-standing political alliance. That lifeline was abruptly disrupted following the January 3 capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro during a U.S. military operation. With leadership in chaos and control over oil infrastructure uncertain, shipments to Cuba declined sharply. Industry data shows that Venezuela had been exporting roughly 26,500 barrels of oil per day to Cuba, covering about half of the island's total oil deficit. Losing that supply created an immediate crisis. The situation became even more complex when President Trump told the New York Times that the United States planned to extract Venezuelan oil and market it globally for years. This raised serious questions about who would control Venezuela's oil and what would happen to countries like Cuba that relied on it. For Havana, the implications appeared grim. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel responded forcefully on social media, condemning Trump's remarks and framing them as immoral and aggressive. He emphasized that Cuba is a free, independent, and sovereign nation and will not accept dictates from abroad. He also referenced reports that more than 24 Cuban military and intelligence personnel died during the operation in Venezuela, underscoring the emotional and political weight of the confrontation. These exchanges are the latest chapter in a long and troubled history. U.S.-Cuba relations have been tense since the 1950s, defined by sanctions, embargoes, and political hostility. For more than 6 decades, Cuba has endured economic pressure from its powerful neighbor to the north, often framing resistance as a matter of survival and national dignity. President Trump, however, offered a starkly different assessment. Speaking publicly, he described Cuba as being on the brink of collapse. According to Trump, without Venezuelan oil, Cuba has no income and no stability. He suggested the island is ready to fall, arguing that the loss of energy supplies has pushed the system to its limits. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio reinforced this hardline stance. A longtime critic of the Cuban government and the son of Cuban immigrants, Rubio described Cuba as a disaster and warned that its leadership should be deeply concerned. His comments signaled that pressure on Havana is unlikely to ease. Cuba's foreign minister, Bruno Rodríguez, rejected these accusations and reaffirmed the island's right to import fuel from any country willing to export it. He accused the United States of behaving like an uncontrolled hegemon and insisted that Cuba has not received monetary compensation for security services provided abroad. From Havana's perspective, the dispute is not only political or economic, but moral. On the ground, the reality is harsh. Cuba's energy system relies almost entirely on imported fuel. When oil shipments decline, power plants reduce output, maintenance is delayed, and blackouts become routine. In recent years, outages have stretched from hours to days, disrupting schools, hospitals, businesses, and basic services. For many Cubans, electricity is no longer guaranteed. Fuel shortages also affect food security. Without diesel, trucks cannot transport food efficiently. Without electricity, refrigeration fails. Without gas, cooking becomes difficult. This has worsened shortages and driven prices higher, especially in urban areas. Debate continues over whether sanctions or internal mismanagement are to blame, but there is little disagreement on one point: ordinary citizens suffer the most. Voices from the streets reflect a mix of defiance and exhaustion. Some Cubans insist they are prepared to endure anything. Others openly admit they are overwhelmed by daily hardship. Over the past 5 years, hundreds of thousands of Cubans have left the island, driven by economic instability, power outages, and lack of opportunity. Migration eases internal pressure but drains the country of skilled workers and young people, deepening long-term challenges. As Venezuelan oil declines, Mexico has emerged as a small but symbolic alternative supplier. Mexican officials acknowledge supplying crude to Cuba, but volumes remain limited and insufficient to replace Venezuela. Other potential partners such as Russia and China offer political support but appear unwilling or unable to fill the gap at scale. Cuba now faces limited options. It can negotiate with the United States, seek new alliances, or attempt to endure prolonged hardship through rationing and internal adjustment. Each path carries risks. President Trump's strategy emphasizes pressure over engagement, a move praised by supporters and criticized by those who warn of humanitarian consequences. Cuba's proximity to the United States magnifies every decision. Just 90 miles separate the two countries, yet politically they remain far apart. Speculation continues over what a potential deal might involve, from economic reforms to political concessions, but no clear framework has been outlined. Voices international reaction has been cautious, leaving Cuba increasingly isolated. Pressure campaigns, history shows, can produce unpredictable results: reform, resistance, or instability. What is certain is that millions of Cubans remain caught in the middle, far removed from the decisions shaping their lives. As it stands now, oil flows remain uncertain, pressure is intensifying, and public patience is wearing thin. Cuba finds itself at one of the most critical crossroads in its modern history. This crisis is not over. The choices made now in Havana and Washington will shape the island's future and ripple far beyond the Caribbean.